Hi, friends. Welcome back. Um, just a short little meditation here. When I was in the Eastern Orthodox, and I hold very much to the Eastern Orthodox faith and and their understanding of um, the Gospels and of Jesus. Um, but in the Eastern Orthodox faith, there was a story, there was an illustration that was used often that I have found to be very, very helpful. And it's the story about, it's an illustration about a sword and fire. And the sword in and of itself is made of cold steel. Now it's Damascus steel or whatever kind of steel, but it's cold. It's you know um, it can be shiny, but it has no illumination. Um, it has no ability to produce anything in and of itself necessarily. But then you have a fire, and that fire is hot, and that fire, just the very nature of fire as it is, produces light. The fire is light, and the fire is heat, and the fire can burn and consume and set other things on fire. But the sword can only cut and is just cold. And but if you take the sword and you put it in the fire and you leave it in the fire, the sword gradually and immediately begins to take on the characteristics of fire. Now, the sword doesn't become fire, and the fire doesn't become the sword, but the fire, the characteristics of the fire and the sword begin to unionize, and the sword now has within itself the heat of the fire, the light of the fire. And you can take that sword out of the fire and you can touch it to something, that will ignite, and it will burn it. It can even ignite it and start it burning on its own. But eventually, as you do that, as you remove it, if you keep it out of the fire, those qualities begin to diminish, and it begins to cool, and the light begins to dim, and the heat begins to withdraw. So in order for the sword to maintain the characteristics and the nature of the fire within itself, it has to abide in the fire. It has to remain in the fire. And that, my friends, is the life that we are called to as Christians. That is the purpose of prayer. That is the purpose of living in Jesus, with Jesus. Colossians, if you are a Christian, Colossians says your life is now hid with Christ in God. And really, I would even say just your life. Whether you are a Christian or not, you may be largely unaware of it, but the scriptures say our life is hidden with Christ in God. We, my friends, can live in the fire, and we can take on the essence, the characteristics of the fire itself, to where we become like fire without becoming fire. And that is prayer. That is life in Jesus. That is living in relationship, loving God and loving humanity, abiding in Him, living in Him. So may we all be the sword that abides in the fire. May we live our lives by the life and the fire of another. May we illuminate and take in the heat and the characteristics of the life of another, because we are in Him and He is in us. So I hope this encourages you. It's a very simple practice to sit with Him and to talk with Him. And it's practice. But He loves us and will help us. So friends, abide in the fire. Abide in the fire. God bless you.